All right, let's talk about a problem that's hiding in plain sight inside so many modern companies. We're all told we need to be data-driven, but what if that very idea, the way we're doing it, is actually keeping us from managing performance at all? Think about it. You've hired all the smart analysts, you've got the fancy dashboards, you're drowning in data. But is all of that actually pushing the business forward in the right direction? Well, the answer, it's a little more complicated than you'd think. Let's get into it. Okay, to really get a grip on this, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. Not that long ago, the typical big company was built around one single idea: centralization. Everything, and I mean everything, was designed for control from the very top. And at the absolute heart of this old model was a function called management control, or contrôle de gestion, as its French pioneers called it. Now, this wasn't just accounting. Think of this function as the CEO's strategic co-pilot. Its only job was to make sure the entire ship was profitable, efficient, and performing at its peak. And it had a direct line right to the captain.
In this classic setup, everything was built for consolidation. Just picture it. All the support functions like finance, HR, IT, all lumped together. But the really critical piece was that the watchdogs, audit and management control, they reported only to the CEO. The whole point was crystal clear: total alignment. Everybody marching to the exact same strategic drumbeat.
But, that world, it couldn't last forever. The market started moving way too fast, and that rigid, top-down structure began to feel less like a strong fortress and a lot more like a cage. Something had to give. And here is the fundamental clash. The old way was super stable, sure, but it was slow. The new world demanded companies be agile, innovative. They had to get products to market faster than ever before. And suddenly, those generalist roles of the past just couldn't keep up with this need for deep, deep specialization. Centralization had become a serious bottleneck. So the solution seemed pretty obvious, right? If you want to get faster, if you want to be more innovative, you have to decentralize. You have to push that decision-making power out from the corporate center and into the hands of the business units themselves. Being agile wasn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It was about survival. But this is where our story takes a really sharp turn. Because this big push for agility, it had a huge, unintended consequence. In that rush to decentralize, something critical, that core function of performance management, it got shattered. And this split happened on two distinct levels. This is really key to understanding the problem that so many companies are facing right now. So let's just trace how this role evolved. It started out as the central controller, right? The CEO's right hand focused on the whole company's bottom line. Then it morphed into the operational controller, still connected to the center, but now embedded inside a department like sales or marketing. But then came the final critical step. The role changed again, this time into the business or data analyst, reporting only to their department head, and their job description changed completely. That final move, that single change which was designed to empower the departments, that's it. That's the moment the critical link in the chain was completely severed. And you can see the result right here. The focus shifted, dramatically. For this new breed of business analysts, the original mission, actually managing performance, it just got pushed to the side. It was almost totally replaced by the new job, just producing data analytics. They became incredible data specialists, but they weren't performance governors anymore. And this brings us right to the heart of the paradox in this story. The very movement that was supposed to bring all this scientific rigor to business, it actually ended up creating a whole lot of confusion. We got more data, but somehow we ended up with less clarity. The sales pitch for all this change was, of course, the incredibly appealing promise of being data-driven. But as the source material for this explainer puts it, this created a huge disconnect from the proven time-tested practices of management control. We basically chased a shiny new object and left a whole lot of wisdom behind.
Which really makes you wonder, right? How can you honestly say you're being rigorous with data if there's no shared, proven, agreed-upon way to even measure performance? If every single team is just making up its own rules, is that rigor? Or is it just chaos with a bunch of spreadsheets?
So the very thing that was supposed to fix everything, these decentralized data analysts,
It ended up creating a massive, hidden problem that spread across the entire organization.
And this fracture led to two, and I mean critical, system-wide failures. Both of them completely undermined the entire goal of being a high-performing, data-driven company.
Okay, so first, you've got a total loss of governance. Without anyone at the helm to set the rules, each team basically becomes its own referee, defining what success means using its own private methods. And second, the original mission was just abandoned. The goal was no longer the hard work of actually steering performance, but the much simpler task of just pumping out reports and charts.
And when you lose that central governance, when no one is in charge of the big picture, well, the consequences are severe. The entire company loses its North Star, and the strategic cost of that fragmentation is just enormous.
When there's no single definition of success, this is exactly what happens. Your sales team starts chasing one number, your marketing team is chasing a completely different one, and operations is off in its own world with a third. Everybody might be hitting their little individual targets, but the company as a whole, it's just spinning in place because nothing is truly aligned.
And the strategic risks here, they're no joke. Your entire data strategy is basically built on a foundation of sand. How can you possibly benchmark your performance against your competitors if your own internal numbers are a total mess? And here's the really terrifying part. A genuinely high-performing team, a true asset to your company, could go completely unnoticed just because its value isn't being measured in a way that anyone else understands.
It really comes down to this. Without that central navigator, that original management control function, a company isn't some high-performance vessel. It's just a collection of really busy people, all working incredibly hard, but ultimately, they're just adrift on a floating piece of wood.
And so let's end right where we started, with a question for you to take back to your own organization. If you don't have a truly shared, governed, and agreed-upon definition of success, are you sure all that data is actually steering you forward? Or is it just steering you in circles? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.